Start whenever?
Yep.
Okay. In recent times, the phrase genetically modified organism has had a lot of stigma put behind it. And the reasoning of that is because people don't respond well to the phrase genetically modified. People think that it's not safe for them and not safe for their kids and such and such. And that's mainly stemmed from a misunderstanding of the phrase genetically modified organism. As the Oxford Dictionary puts it, the quote-unquote definition of a genetically modified organism, biotech crop, or genetically engineered crop is a crop which has had its genetic code altered in ways not available in nature. Not available in nature. Meaning that it's unnatural. Is again another word used to... Can I start over?
Just catch your breath, sure.
I get anxious a lot.
That's okay. It's just us. Don't worry about it.
So, our ability to engineer these crops to our own advantage allows us to make them safer and healthier. And they are not without regulation, as most people assume that they are. Most people assume that they are not under regulation of the governments, but they are. USDA recently came out with a study that showed that over 17,000 tests have been conducted on genetically modified crops to show that they're completely safe. These are independent studies conducted yet coagulated by the USDA and Federal Administration of Drugs of America. And so they're completely safe for consumption, and in fact even better for us because of the ways that we can add nutritional value and such and such. Such examples of this was that genetically modified organizations and organism organizations have showed increases in serotonin and vitamins D and A in bananas currently. And with the altering of these vitamins and increasing and decreasing certain chemicals, what we also alter is the ability of the chemicals that they excrete. This means that we can completely eliminate the use for dangerous pesticides, because the plants themselves will excrete chemicals toxic to their predators, but not to us humans, which is great. And so, because they are much more fortified against these predators and much more fortified against disease and such. Well, the reason that they're much more fortified against disease is because when we alter their genetic code, a disease doesn't know where to attack. A disease doesn't know how to attack this organism. And so it rids us of the risk of extinction within plant life, which doesn't really seem plausible, but it actually is a very big problem. Recently in the 1950s, actually, let me start off with an example. Have any of you had banana flavored candy or anything? And you notice how it doesn't taste like bananas? This is because that flavoring was based off of a strain before the 1950s known as the Gross-Mickle strain. And the Gross-Mickle strain was primarily grown in plantations within Cuba and such, and it went completely extinct due to a disease known as the Panama disease. And so what we currently eat now in bananas is a certain cultivar known as Cavendish. And so with genetically modified organisms, we're able to prevent stuff like this from ever happening and preventing extinction. Another upside to the genetically modified organisms and biotech crops is that they help address the global food crisis. Now, in case most of you don't know, the global food crisis is, a food crisis that is global, and a lot of third world countries suffer from not having enough food because of poor soil treatment or just improper imports and such. But with genetically modified organisms, we are able to have higher yields in food and higher biomass within our vegetation, allowing us to import more and more food. So this will help address that and help us give more food just away. And the USDA showed that since biotech crops were implemented within 1996, that we have grown over 15 plus millions more tons of just soybeans, just since 1996, than we would have within a regular projected yield. And this is with like global warming and the diminishing quality of soil as we recycle topsoil and such and such. So instead of being scared of genetically modified organisms, being scared of that idea, we need to embrace it. I mean, Christ, the iPhone gets bigger every year. You're not up in arms about that. It's merely the way of progress.
Did you get it? Yeah. Yeah, me neither. All right, Desmond, I know what the subject is. I think you need a clearer statement of what the purpose is, the proposition is going to be. There's not really a layout of what the secondary structure is going to be. At one point, you had a set of statements that said it's going to be, safer, healthier, and it's well regulated. And I thought, oh, well, maybe that's going to be the preview of what the structure is. But I didn't really hear anything that fit that in the body of the presentation. Instead, the information seems to come up randomly. Sometimes there's a claim, sometimes there's just an example that's being presented, but it's never really structured and easy for people to follow. And you need to do that in a speech so that listeners can be able to process information. Frankly, audiences, most listeners are not very good. They need a lot of help. And if you don't give them a structure, a pattern to follow, if you don't give them clear links between the ideas that you're presenting, it's much easier for them to lose information that you think is important to them. And I think that that's one of the things that would happen without the structure that you needed here. I thought you started off well with a couple of ideas concerning evidence. You had this kind of collective of USDA information that refers to 17,000 studies that have found that they are all particularly safe. It is a little generic, of course, and I think that if it was more specific to the different kinds of crops that had been tested, that would probably add a little bit of confidence. Like I said, it's a very sweeping sort of statement, and the source citation of the USDA is okay, but I think it would be helpful if all this data that had been collated could be identified in a particular date and year also, and so some of the sources are not as well cited as they could be. You had a nice example with the banana example. I kind of understood the thing that you were talking about, although the demonstration that this would, genetically modifying foods is going to eliminate species die-off. I'm not exactly sure why that's the case, unless you're saying that we can just save the DNA and reproduce it by cloning or something like that. But that doesn't sound like the argument that you were making, so I'm not sure why that's the case. The argument that they're going to be impervious to predators or to disease, that's a good claim to make. We need to see a little bit more proof of it. It's mostly an assertion here. The argument about increasing food supplies or addressing the global food crisis, as you termed it. The best evidence that you have on that is basically the soybean yield that's changed over the years, but it doesn't seem like it's particularly unique to any one area. It increases the amount of food that's available, but does that address the issues of, like you said, places where the soil is problematic or there are drought issues? Can they grow those things there? You say that that's going to happen. I'm going, the only demonstration I got was the soybean thing, and that seemed like it was U.S. yields, so we're not exactly in the same situation that some of those other places are. All right, thank you. Saul? Yes. Outlines to do refutations on, you mean? I believe I had one, didn't I? That was math working.